Well, a Jays firing has come in today, plus what went wrong in the 2024 season.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jays. Thank you for making Locked On Blue Jays your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDON MLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. As always, I'm Braden Iwasco. He's Carter First. You can find us on Twitter, Braden5Iwasco. Carter First, too, as well on Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Blue Jays as well. If you're new here on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It really does help us out. If you're listening anywhere else, make sure you tune in to the YouTube as well. Hit the notification button in case we go live or we post shorts, reels, whatever there is. They'll all be up there as well. We talked about some big news here coming up, but just quick housekeeping stuff. We got a shop open. It's got like some merch from us, some Blue Jays content, stuff like that on there where you guys can go and buy a shirt, buy a hoodie, whatever you guys want. If you want to, I don't know, Carter, there's like a million things on there. They can go take a look at whatever. Link is in the description. You go and click that, hit that, and it'll take you right to the page as well. We did make a Discord. So for any of you guys wanting to, get in touch with us, talk with other Blue Jays fans and other people that watch Locked On Blue Jays, you can go and find the Discord and chat about whatever you guys want. We'll be in there as well from time to time talking to you guys. Just a ton to get into. It seems like the Blue Jays offseason is starting off with a bang here. There was a Jays firing. We're going to get into that. I'm going to send that over to Carter, and he can break that all down. But we're going to really get into today's episode of what went wrong in 2024. That's the big question, right? Out of everything that started here, what went wrong? What was the turning point that made this season so unbearable? Carter, let's start with the Jays firing. Send it off to you.
It's kind of funny on the last podcast where you said, other than the MLB playoffs, there probably wasn't going to be a lot of Blue Jays news. And here we are, first podcast. We already have a Blue Jays firing. And this one, probably the first of many, I'm going to assume, being Guillermo Martinez, 6 years as the Toronto Blue Jays hitting coach. Obviously let go after an abysmal year, not necessarily offensively in the back half of the season. He kind of had some things figured out. But overall, you look at 2023, you look at 2024, and you just look at the trending numbers from the Guillermo Martinez tenure. It's not looking too great. So with Guillermo, I'll start at 2021. Obviously, when you go to 2021, that is the best Toronto Blue Jays offensive season for me in recent memory. You can go back to the 2015, 2016 team, stuff like that. But obviously, Guillermo wasn't here. His best season with the Toronto Blue Jays is 2021. My thing with these hitting coaches is how much is this really contributed to them? Like, is it more so Vladdy was just one of the best players in the universe at that point? We had Teoscar, we had a million guys who were hitting home runs. And now you look at this roster, you look at the power, you look at just how capable they are offensively. It's not like Guillermo Martinez is going to shape these guys and completely fix them or ruin their careers. It's a lot of this is about the talent on the Toronto Blue Jays. But looking at the numbers from 2021 to 2024, the runs has been consistently going down from 2021, 846, then 2022, 775, 746 in 2023, and then 671 in 2024. Home runs, as we've seen, this is the big drop that I was very surprised about when this graphic came out. In 2021, we had 262 home runs. 2022 had 200. 2023, 188. 2024, 156. So that's over 100 less home runs in a season. That's pretty much a home run every game or every other game, just over that. So there's a lot of home runs that this team was missing out on compared to the 2021 team. Again, for me, how much is Guillermo Martinez really going to impact these numbers? He's going to help a little bit, again, with the minor fixes. Maybe players are going through a slump. Maybe a routine, little things like that. But overall, for the entire skill of a baseball player, they made it so far into the major leagues. Is the hitting coach really going to impact them that much? I don't really think so.
Carter, the biggest thing for a hitting coach, in my mind, is when you have a guy like Davis Schneider who seems to not be able to get out of a slump, right? That's when a hitting coach's job comes into play, right? Looking at the little things and figuring out, okay, what little thing can I change that might give him success? And what we've seen is we've had a lot of guys in slumps and that have been able to break out, like George Springer at the start of the year, who we'll get into. There's a lot of pieces like that we just weren't seeing those little adjustments even being considered, it looked like, Carter. So I think this is just a move into maybe getting some fresh eyes on some players moving into 2025. And again, Guillermo, I mean, I don't know. I don't love him. I don't hate him. He's sort of whatever for me. So for this firing to happen, maybe it's time that this organization is moving in a new direction and needing to find new guys. And I don't necessarily hate them for doing that.
Well, just looking at the basic numbers from this team, 23rd in the league in runs scored, 26th in home runs as the numbers sit. OPS under league average. That's not what you want from your offense, obviously. You want to be an above league average offense at really the minimum at this point. So when you look at a team that's struggling, that things don't go very well, usually you're going to look at the coaches right away. John Schneider, Ross Atkins, Guillermo Martinez, Hunter Mentz, these kind of guys, Don Mattingly as well. Some of these guys will be fired, obviously. Some of these guys have bigger roles than others. You can definitely say Ross Atkins has a bigger role than a guy like Guillermo Martinez. So it's just an easy guy to kind of take the fall. I think a lot of the fans are probably going to like this move as well. It's just kind of like another fall guy, just sort of how John Schneider was with the Jose Berrios decision in those playoffs. So it seems like the Toronto Blue Jays like to just kind of pick their one guy out, maybe blame it on them. I wouldn't be surprised if Ross Atkins came out with some quotes, maybe throwing some shade at Guillermo Martinez. But that's kind of where we're at in Toronto Blue Jays land. We'll see who the replacement is. Again, is it going to be a huge increase in offensive production? Probably not going to get it from the hitting coach. You're probably going to get it for who they signed from free agency. But the AAA coach from the Bisons, you see all these Bisons hitters raking when they get to the MLB level. Wouldn't be the worst idea to take a look at the options from within.
And you know what? That's definitely an option, right? For this team, they've done well with bringing guys up and sort of molding them how they want so that they can, have contributions with these guys when they're younger, then when they get up into the big leagues. So no, I 100% agree with you. I don't think that would be the worst decision, but I don't think that can be the only decision. We talk about having plan A, plan B. I don't necessarily know about taking a look outside in other markets to find a good piece that can really come in and bolster and do the little things and do the things properly that can bolster this offense.
Yeah, your coaches can only take you so far. That's kind of my final thoughts on this. Is it time for Guillermo Martinez to go? Probably. If things aren't going well, you can only stay with the same coaching staff for so long. So I'm open to new staff, new minds in the Toronto Blue Jays clubhouse. Maybe we can pick some of these players' brains, especially like guys like Bichette. If you want a guy to kind of bounce back and have a good year, maybe getting a new hitting coach, maybe get some new designs and strategies for Bichette might help him with a little bit of a bounce back season for 2025. But saying that, we have a lot more to go over. We got to go over this horrendous season. And this is why Guillermo Martinez was fired. You don't get fired as a coaching staff if you have a successful season. That's just not something that does happen. So let's start all the way before the season, before even spring training. I know we've talked about this a lot, so we're not going to spend too much time on this. Where did it go wrong to start off this season? Braden, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, again, this was one that hurt me and hurt all of Blue Jays fans, right? Blue Jays land was in complete disaster zone when this happened. Shohei Ohtani was rumored to be a Toronto Blue Jay. $700 million. He was on the flight. The restaurant was booked. Not so much. The rug gets pulled out from under all of Blue Jays Nation. And looking back, there wasn't a backup plan. And that is the biggest, and I've talked about the backup plan so much, right? Going into next season, you have to have one. And the ball was dropped with the Shohei Ohtani deal, right? Obviously, that wasn't going to happen. What was going to be your plan B? Yes, you weren't going to get even 2 or 3 guys that were going to combine to match up to Shohei Ohtani. But you have to have other options. And then obviously Carter going in and taking a look at where it went. You get guys, you bring back Kevin Kiermaier, you get Justin Turner and his old ass. And then you get IKF, who, debatably at the start, we weren't too high on, had a pretty good season, but now you see him, he's dropped off as well. Great trade piece. But for more than that, it wasn't really anything. There was zero plan beyond Shohei Ohtani, and it was more of a pivot. And I don't think I think, like I've said, we've talked about this enough, moving into 2025, it can't be a pivot. You have to lay out your options, A, B, C. This is what happens if this guy says no. Then you move here, and you move here, and you move here. So Carter, to start everything off, that was the biggest component of this season, is just no backup plan.
Yeah, it doesn't matter which situation you're in. If you're an MLB organization, you should have a plan for every single outcome. But playing devil's advocate here, if you were ever going to go all in on one player ever, Shohei Ohtani is probably that player that you do want to go all in on. But yeah, it definitely sucks when you don't land Shohei Ohtani and your consolation prize is 39-year-old Justin Turner and then Kevin Kiermaier, the carcass of him. IKF, being one of the better signings. And then Yariel Rodriguez, again, there's a few signings that were good from this offseason. It's not enough to bolster a Toronto Blue Jays team that needed offense so badly, needed bullpen help so badly as well. So Shohei Ohtani doesn't go our way. Obviously goes to the Dodgers. Was always the Dodgers, in my opinion. Obviously, we wish Toronto Blue Jays Nation would have known that as well, just so our feelings and hopes wouldn't have gotten so high. But the fall off, obviously, due to Shohei, is you don't get Shohei. And like we said, you just don't do what you need to do in free agency. You don't get a power bat. You don't really upgrade the offense at all. And you look at the stats offensively from the start of the season, the first half of the season, we were statistically worse than the second half of the season. In the second half, we had a million Buffalo Bisons players. So clearly, the free agency signings didn't work out. You didn't bolster this offense enough. Early season struggles. You had some players, obviously, that weren't helping out as well, as we're going to get into. But the rest of this is kind of, well, actually, there is one more part of this. This is before the season. And it's the kind of in the spring training aspect of this. And it's some major injuries to the Toronto Blue Jays, some veteran players, some key players that were supposed to be leading you for the 2024 season. So going into this, I have 4 major players that were injured in spring training. The one that is, I guess, the least factored into the Toronto Blue Jays' lack of success is Kevin Gausman. Kevin Gausman didn't have the greatest spring training, struggled with some injuries, had a shoulder injury, and it was capsulitis in his right throwing shoulder. I had to look up what that was. No clue. Obviously, I'm not a doctor. Pretty much what it is, it's just shoulder stiffness and shoulder pain. So obviously, as a pitcher, your throwing arm, you probably don't want that to be sore as you're throwing. So Kevin Gausman kind of just took it leisurely into spring training, got his innings, got his ramp up. But did end up pitching in the first week, did get his first opening slate, pitched on the 4th Toronto Blue Jays game of the season. Then you had guys like Jordan Romano. Obviously, these injuries lasted all season long, impact his production all season long. You look at a guy like Erik Swanson, had injuries, and obviously don't want to go into this too much because it did work out for the best. His son did have a scary injury. He did make a full recovery. Everything is fine now. But obviously in these moments, family does come first. We've said on the podcast, whenever there is a family emergency, it's no questions asked. Baseball does not even matter anymore. You go straight back to your family.
Yeah, Carter. And I mean, you know what? We've had this conversation on that guy, on Erik Swanson and what happened. But obviously it does impact your season, right? And yes, 100%, family has to come first. And I think you're seeing now what Erik Swanson does when he was able to ramp up and sort of get back to business here. He was very good at the end of the season. Then Jordan Romano, of course, the injury, right? They didn't give him the full recovery time, obviously, because now it came back to bite them and has impacted him for the rest of 2024. So that's a major component. When you're closer, the guy who you rely on all of the time is not 100%. You bring him back anyway, and he's out for the season. That's going to impact any team. It doesn't matter who you are. You're going to drop games because of that, and that's what happened here. So talking about what went wrong, these preseason injuries, it's a huge component, and it gets overlooked of how things started to go for this Toronto Blue Jays team, even to start the season.
Well, look at a guy like Blake Snell, previous NL Cy Young winner. The first 3 months of the season, he was one of the worst pitchers I've ever seen, and he didn't have a spring training whatsoever. That's what happens when you don't get your reps in. Baseball is such a hard sport to be good at year in and year out. You're not playing every single day. It's going to be tough to compete against these guys that are working their tails off to be the best out there. One more guy that was also injured. This one, now I can say this with a bit more of a clear mind because he's not on our baseball team. Danny Jansen was injured. Who would have thought, honestly? Again, a little bit unlucky, but this guy was just made of glass, just some unfortunate injuries. But for this one, Danny Jansen was on the 10-day IL with a right wrist fracture. And it's because he got hit with a baseball. Before Leo Jimenez was Danny Jansen. He was the magnet. And now, unfortunately, he has passed on that trait to Leo Jimenez. Good thing, knock on wood, Leo Jimenez has not been hurt because of that. But again, hopefully the ball can cease to maybe skip a few times behind Leo Jimenez or at his feet, something like that, instead of, hitting him in the ribs, hitting him in the hands. You don't like to see that, especially from a young guy on your Toronto Blue Jays team, especially when you have a million other prospects that are already on the IL with surgeries and other injuries of the sort.
Yeah, Carter. And we talked about a couple guys. I mean, Ricky Tiedemann is another one, right? Obviously out, and he's been out with injury a ton. And when you look at these prospects and guys coming up now, the biggest thing is avoiding injuries, right? That's what sets careers back. And so, good thing for Leo Jimenez is that he hasn't been, seriously injured because of one of these balls, but it can happen. Danny Jansen, that injury really doesn't leave me with anything. He's gone now. It doesn't help me looking forward to 2025, but it's another component where this season just didn't start off on the right foot. And I mean, as we go along here, Carter, we're going to realize that there was a lot more problems than just maybe the ones that stick out to you. And we're going to break all that down. Still coming up. We still got a ton more to talk about. Where did this season really take a turn for the worst? We're going to get all into that right away. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more to come.
Today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play fantasy sports because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you can pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. So obviously the Toronto Blue Jays are not playing baseball anymore. So I'm going to shift some of my Prize Picks attention to the NFL. Got some games on today. I like Manoah more than receiving yards. I got that at 64.5. I think that is an automatic. A lot of good storylines from tonight. I got Kenneth Walker more than yards as well. Geno Smith, this is more of a fantasy one. I am playing against him, so I got him less than in yards. So again, I'm going from game trends. I'm also using a little bit of my fantasy bias because I like riding with my fantasy teams. I'm a big fantasy guy, and Prize Picks gives me the opportunity to not only be excited about my fantasy players making me money on my fantasy teams, but also making me money in my bank account. So you can download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit matchup to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit matchup to $100. Prize Picks, run your game.
So, Carter, obviously a ton more to get into here. What went wrong in this 2024 season? You know, we've talked about the injury bug, the Shohei Ohtanis of the world, everything that went wrong before the season, Carter. Now let's get into some of the stuff that happened throughout the season that really just kicked the Blue Jays when they were down.
The first one, the one that we were nonstop talking about for what felt like eternity at the time. I think looking back at it, it was the first 55 to 60 games, which is still insane to look back at. And it was the downfall of George Springer. This guy he looked like a T-ball player at the plate for the first third of the season. This guy at one point was a bottom 3 hitter in a ton of offensive categories, OPS being one of them, average being one of them. Not scenarios that you want your $25 million per year player to be in, especially in the third last year of his contract. Still 2 more years of George Springer after this. We did get a little bit of a George Springer insanity run. Almost saved the season, almost had us back in. But it was really only 1 month looking back at it. He had about a 25 to 30 game stretch where he was really good. Made his season look a little bit better than it should have. Kind of like the Bo Timber we got from 2022. Obviously, that was way more in the insanity run. That was one of the best performances I've ever seen. But this little George Springer stretch was like a knockoff version of Bo Timber. But the good month of George Springer was July. It was late June, early July before the All-Star break. And this guy was going off. He had 274, an OPS of 848. Again, I said going off. That was for George Springer. That was George Springer's best stretch. When you look at other guys, you look at MLB's talent, like guys, obviously these superstars. You got like guys like Gunnar Henderson, Vladimir, Aaron Judge, all these guys at the top. 848 OPS, you're probably not putting George Springer in the same conversation as a lot of these other guys. But we were saying, we were kind of riding this out a little bit longer than we probably should have. That, George Springer, like since after the All-Star break, he's kind of been okay, right? We have that recency bias. We remember him being good. Post All-Star break, George Springer, a 213 average, 661 OPS, not really doing a whole lot for me. Doesn't get to 20 home runs on the year. Just when you talk about Bichette being bad this season, George Springer is pretty close there with him. And the big reason that this was such a huge problem is that George Springer was leading off for this baseball team for such an unreasonable amount of time. It was unbelievable how bad this guy was at the top of the lineup and how long John Schneider continued to aimlessly just not use his eyes on the baseball field and keep him blindly in there.
Carter, this was a huge problem, right? We like you said, nonstop we're at George Springer, and for good reason. I mean, it's not just a George Springer problem of not being good. Don't get me wrong. That's the big problem. The secondary problem is this management team and Ross Atkins, John Schneider, whoever you want to call it, of keeping him in the leadoff spot 60 games in when he hasn't done a thing. And yes, they talked about it's going to come. 60 games is too late. The season's over. We knew at that point, Carter, that this was not a playoff team. And so 2024, you talk about just the mismanagement. It's mismanagement all around. You can't leave a guy at the top of the order hitting 160 on the year and praying to God that it works out. That's not how good baseball organizations are ran. It can't be. There were better options at the time. And I'm not saying that it would have made a huge difference of how this season would have turned out, but it's definitely a stepping stone for sure.
Well, at that point, David Schneider was still playing pretty good baseball. We had Daulton Varsho, who had a pretty good first 2 months of the season. After that, kind of fell off the face of the earth. And we had Spencer Horwitz a little bit later on. I think this was sort of around the time where they were starting to go away from George Springer in the leadoff spot. So there was some options. But for me, at the end of the day, this is still a John Schneider problem. There's no way you should have George Springer in this lineup at the number one spot. But there was really not a true leadoff hitter for the Toronto Blue Jays. You didn't have that like stereotypical leadoff hitter, the fast guy that's getting on base, just kind of slapping singles around the ballpark. Did not have any of that. And going into next year, this is going to be a huge debate as well. Not probably going to get into that as much on this podcast, who's going to be on in the leadoff spot. But I know me and you can agree. I'm sure a lot of other Toronto Blue Jays fans can agree as well. George Springer should not be the one leading off the Toronto Blue Jays in 2025.
You touched on the numbers, Carter, with George Springer. I mean, again, we can go on and on about George Springer, but he's not the guy. His time's over, and I think it's time for Blue Jays fans. For those of you who haven't already realized it, that George Springer is not the solution to this team. And I think, like you said, it is time we move on. At least him out of the leadoff spot, right? He's going to be a part of this team next season, but I don't think it's going to be as big of a capacity as he was in 2024 and 2023. It is interesting to look at. Yes, you want to blame John Schneider, you want to blame Ross Atkins, but at the end of the day, it wasn't just George Springer not playing well. There was a lot of guys in this lineup not doing their jobs. And when you have very little option, which these guys were left with very little option, it is hard to move on to a guy that might do the same thing. And then, then it's in a bigger problem. At least this way, they could have blamed it on George Springer's lackluster start, and nobody would turn a blind eye. If they would have gone back and switched things up and realized nobody's working out, then it's on them, and they got to take responsibility. It was a late decision by John Schneider and Ross Atkins to do anything about this. There wasn't moves made in relation to this of trying to be better, right? They tried to wait it out and ride it out, and they thought everything was just going to be fine. Then 60 games in, panic started to set in, and George Springer decided to turn it up for like a month. So this was a very small component of this season that went wrong again. But when we look at everything that went wrong, I think for all of Blue Jays fans, this is the one that's going to stick out heavily in their minds going into 2025.
It has to. There's no way it can't. This was so bad on Twitter at one point where people were coming up with conspiracy theories that the lineup card was just printed out with George Springer at the leadoff spot and he just couldn't be changed because that's just all the lineup cards. Didn't matter. John Schneider just didn't even look at the leadoff spot. It was George Springer there. Some people were saying it was in his contract that he had to be leading off. It was kind of funny at some points, but it was really bad to watch that guy be a leadoff hitter on your baseball team. And for a guy that had a weighted runs created plus of 95 throughout the entirety of the season, again, that is with his mini insanity run. He's still a below average hitter throughout the rest of these months. He was a pretty good hitter for a 25 game span. What about the other 140, 135 games? Yeah. It's kind of a problem where you're not an above average hitter for the entirety of the season. You have one good month and you're still not quite there. That means he was very far below a league average hitter, and he was still leading off the Toronto Blue Jays for a significant period of time. And the problem with George Springer being so bad is that the next guy we have in the batting order was debatably worse, with Bichette just not having a good season. The good thing about Bichette, for me, the difference between George Springer and Bichette is Bichette has had this history of just a very good baseball player, way above league average, obviously going into his prime as well. Age is a factor. George Springer has shown seasons from 2022, 2023, 2024. The numbers are consistently going down. Bichette hasn't really had that. He's had his numbers going up and up and up until this season. Had some injury troubles, obviously struggled at the plate as well. Just couldn't really figure it out. So obviously you need Bichette. I don't know what went wrong with Bichette. I can't be the one. You look at the stats. His chase rate is fine. It's not lower at all. He's hitting baseballs on a line pretty much the exact same way. It's just some of the swings. It's just like the eye test for me is what really gets it. You see in specific scenarios, get the odd 2-2 count, 2-strike count, whether it's a 3-2 count, whatever it is. You get the odd Bichette, just weird swing where he's swinging at a slider that is in the other batter's box, or maybe you get a bad call by the ump. Seems like a lot of things just weren't going Bichette's way. And I'm really hoping that we can just chalk 2024 up to a lost season completely, and especially with Bichette and his offensive production. I have Bichette as being a prime bounce back candidate. Everyone is kind of writing Bichette off. I think he's going to use that. It's going to motivate him, and he's going to come back even better in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, Carter. He is a great baseball player. And yes, the recency bias with Toronto Blue Jays fans is so huge, right? Bichette didn't have a good season, people are writing him off. He's going to come back. And I fully am in total agreement with you that he is going to be back better than ever next season. But yeah, there was a problem in 2024, and he was one of them, which sucks, right? Because you expect him to do so well, and then when he lets you down, it's like everything around the Toronto Blue Jays just didn't work this season. George Springer, Bichette, the bullpen. There was so many holes and just guys having down years all at the same time. And Vladimir Guerrero Jr. decided he thought he was going to be able to carry this team on his shoulders right to the playoffs. And that just isn't how baseball works. You can't do that as much as he maybe tried.
I'd like to argue that. I think Francisco Lindor actually just accomplished that feat not more than an hour ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I get it is possible. Is that good for sustained success? We'll find out, I guess. We'll see if Lindor can carry that Mets team throughout the playoffs. But yeah, you're right. It's very unlikely. You don't see it happen pretty much ever. It's hard for one man to lead an entire baseball team unless, again, maybe you're Aaron Judge. So there is some anomalies here. But for the most part, for I guess I'm not even going to say the average human being. I wouldn't say Vlad is an average human being. For the guys that aren't just like mythical legends like Aaron Judge, just have a lab, seems like this guy came out of. But yeah, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., great season. Like out of a season of so many negatives, we're not going to really talk about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. when it comes to what went wrong with the Toronto Blue Jays.
No, exactly. And there was way more problems as we've talked about. There's so many more problems than for us to even talk about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. because what a season he had. But going back to Bichette, Carter, I mean, it's a problem. He's the guy that you expect to be right there with Vlad competing for who's the best Toronto Blue Jay on the offense. And he wasn't even close. So that's a big issue. A guy you're going to pay big bucks to probably in this offseason with his extension, or we hope. You need him to be better. And there's really no excuse for him and George Springer. There is no excuse for them not to be good baseball players. And when they let you down, it hurts because you're going to feel it right throughout the lineup. You don't have those 2-3 guys that are going to, you got Vladdy as your superstar, but those next 2 or 3 or 4 guys that you want to be excellent baseball players and you need them to be excellent baseball players. When they don't show up, you have nothing left of an offense.
Yeah, that's what the Toronto Blue Jays offense was through the first half of the season. Just a whole lot of nothing. It's a bottom 4, bottom 5, and pretty much every single offensive statistical category that you can name. We have a couple more things to go into. I got a few more things that went wrong. You touched on the bullpen. We'll get more into that in the last segment, and then just our overall thoughts on the abysmal 2024 season of the Toronto Blue Jays. Got a bunch more to get into. We're just going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. I've talked about all the time, the live same-game parlays with FanDuel are one of my favorite things to use because I'm in the game. I'm watching it. I'm feeling it. I know who's doing well and who isn't, and I can place those bets whenever I want to. That's why I love FanDuel. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Me and Carter are going to be riding football pretty aggressively here. We're going to be placing bets. I've got some down for, I guess, last night's game and then the week to come. I have just been using FanDuel like crazy because why not? And you can see who's betting the same stuff as you, which is really fun too. You can see how many people have the same idea as you. Again, visit FanDuel.com. Today's episode also brought to you by Game Time. You guys know I'm a huge fan of Game Time because I don't like getting my tickets anywhere else that's not Game Time. They have all the great deals, all the great places to use, and they have a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Like I've talked about when we went down to New York, Minneapolis, Toronto, wherever else to watch baseball games, Game Time was my first place to look to get those tickets. They have the all-in pricing, which is my favorite thing. You don't have to be guessing what your ticket's going to cost at checkout. You know what it's going to be right there when you click on it. They have the seat views, again, a great tool. And they have the lowest price guaranteed, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. We're back. Way more stuff to talk about, Carter. There was way more than 2, 3, 4 things that went wrong with this Toronto Blue Jays team. So let's get right back into it. We're going to get into the bullpen, I'm sure, Carter. Where is that where you want to go next?
Yeah, I got 3 more things. We'll start with the bullpen. This is one that, again, you got to blame it a little bit on this pitching or this managerial staff, Ross Atkins. This bullpen was top 5 last season. Do you expect this big of a just drop off? You can't say that, but again, you don't do anything to add depth. You don't do anything to bolster it whatsoever. A lot of these pitchers in this bullpen had career years in 2023. You had to expect some regression. I was thinking league average. I wasn't thinking worst in the league necessarily, but obviously you had some injuries that attributed to this, some off the field issues as well as we've gone into the Erik Swanson stuff, Jordan Romano being hurt. Having 2 guys that led your bullpen in 2023 not being there in 2024, it's probably going to lead to some issues in your bullpen. But going over this season, what a disaster of a bullpen this was. If we go over from start to finish, just the revolving door of the Toronto Blue Jays bullpen, there's going to be some interesting names that we have that came in and out. Jose Cuas making memories for the Toronto Blue Jays. 3 pitches, gave up 3, I think it was 2 pitches, 3 runs he gave up. Something that just doesn't happen. Setting him on the wrong side of the history books for the Toronto Blue Jays. But let's while we're talking about the bullpen, there's so many bad things we can talk about. I just want to give a quick shout out to Chad Green, the guy that stuck it out the entire season. That's another guy that was injured at the start of the season, came back and pretty much was the closer for the Toronto Blue Jays for the back half. This is a guy that was thrown into a lot of different roles this season, adjusted accordingly, and this is a guy that I'm excited for the Toronto Blue Jays to bring back for the 2025 season. Other than that, Brendan Little, I got to give him his flowers. It's one guy that we pulled up from the AAA system and actually had a good impact on the Toronto Blue Jays. So credit to him, credit to Brendan Little in my opinion, earning a spot on the Toronto Blue Jays 2025 bullpen roster.
Yeah, and just talking about before we get into the negatives here, another guy for me, Carter, that really surprised me, obviously Henny Cabrera. I mean, again, a guy that I just had zero faith in going into this season, and he's really changed my opinion. So congrats to him. I hope that he can keep everything going into 2025 and have a great rest of his career, but we'll have to see what happens as he's sort of been a little bit of a diamond here in this season. But the bullpen overall, I mean, there's no excuse. I don't necessarily think they had to see this coming, but that's what bullpens are. But you have to adjust very, very regularly with bullpens. You never know what's going to happen when you are missing 2 of your best guys. Tim Meza falls off a cliff somewhere, and a bunch of things going wrong. You got to adjust. And again, we talk about the late adjustments, the not making moves quick enough. That's a problem with this managerial staff on this Toronto Blue Jays team. They don't adjust fast enough, and then they get left behind in the dirt, and they wait too long, and games start to pile up. Then they try to make it back, and it's just too little, too late. And that's a huge component with this bullpen. There was no looking for another piece partway through the season. There was nothing. When Jordan Romano was out and Erik Swanson was gone, or the Chad Green injury, or whatever you want to talk about, all of these problems, there wasn't one move being made really that was going to help. And that's a huge issue.
That is absolutely a huge, huge issue. But you can't say the Toronto Blue Jays weren't trying to at least get their bullpen going. I just counted how many bullpen arms through this season. I'm just going to let you guess. How many bullpen arms do you think, different bullpen arms through for the Toronto Blue Jays in 2024?
21.
26. 20, a revolving door of a Toronto Blue Jays bullpen. I did throw Tyler Heineman and Ernie Clement in there, so it's actually 24, but I thought that was funny. It was on the stat sheet that I did have. But 20, it's like an offensive line in football. If you have that many injuries, that many people coming in and out, it's going to be hard for you to have a successful bullpen. Like, you need those back end of the guys to at least have some sort of stabilization, and you didn't really have that either. Again, if you have a couple injuries, but you still have a top 4 that you can rely on, that's something you can kind of work out. The Toronto Blue Jays had like one pitcher they could rely on, Chad Green. You're throwing him out there. Again, Henny Cabrera was pretty good as well. I got to throw him in there. I'll say 2. But like, look, some of these other guys, like you had Luis Fries out there, you had Jose Cuas, Yari Rodriguez was one of the worst pitchers I've ever seen. There's so many guys that came out and just looked horrible. So some of the experiments weren't going to work, but it is kind of the trial and error that constructing a bullpen takes now in this current age of the MLB. So obviously the bullpen back end of the year, pretty much the entire season, bottom 3 in a lot of numbers. ERA is second worst in the league. it's just not going to work, unfortunately, especially when your starting pitching was a little bit inconsistent this year. You had some games where you get a stretch where the pitchers were just elite and all of them went 7 innings. And you had some stretches where you get 4 1/3, you get a 5, and you get 4 innings. And then the bullpen needed to be used a little bit more. And boy, did you ever notice that the Toronto Blue Jays bullpen was not nearly as good as it was in 2023 during those moments. But a couple more things I wanted to go into. I'm not going to spend too much time on this part, but obviously one major thing is you did make these signings for free agency. You got Justin Turner. You expect him to have a better year. You got Kevin Kiermaier. You didn't expect maybe 265 for an average and the on-base clip at like 330, but you maybe hope for, a 225 average from Kevin Kiermaier. You didn't really get that. IKF being a good signing, ended up flipping him for Charles McAdoo, kind of fell back off to his regular playing. So that's why we were pretty high on getting rid of IKF, selling him at his highest point. And then, you got Yariel Rodriguez, who probably goes down as your best signing from that offseason. But again, just not enough. The veterans don't work out. Pretty much black holes, all of them in your lineup. Maybe other than Justin Turner, I'll give him more of a benefit of the doubt. And then it just all comes back to the Toronto Blue Jays. The media during this time was just wait. We'll figure it out. The Toronto Blue Jays will get better. Just wait. It's all going to come through fruition. We never got that. That never happened. The Toronto Blue Jays never figured out how to consistently play good baseball in 2024. And it definitely was frustrating hearing Ross Atkins just say, just have some patience, Sean Schneider, have some patience, when it was very obvious what we had in front of us.
Yeah, Carter. And you know what? I'm going to get way more into this because we have an episode coming out that is going to talk just how poisonous really the Toronto Blue Jays media this season was. And as good as most of these people do at their jobs, the handling of every situation, the star power that was on some of these guys in the spotlight, it was all just handled really, really poorly this year. And telling the fans and telling them to wait like we're children and we don't understand what's going on, it was a bit of a smack in the face here when I think we all saw what was coming. They expected a big turnaround 35, 40 games in, and it just never happened. And you can't expect that to. I think looking back, that was a big fault to this team and I keep going back to it, right? Is not making moves quick enough, not understanding the situation that they were in fast enough and adjusting to that. And that's going to come down to a big problem. And I really hope that this management team and, John Schneider, everybody all understand what it's going to look like moving into 2025 and what needs to be done, because I don't know if I could stand sitting here and watching the same team rolled out for 2025 with the same problems.
Oh, it would be frustrating. That might be my hell if this team just doesn't do anything in this offseason. And we roll out this defensive first strategy that has worked so obviously well for the Toronto Blue Jays in the 2 years that they've tried to do this. But yeah, just going over the season, there's so many things that went wrong. You could list off probably another 30, 35 things that went wrong for the Toronto Blue Jays season. Not a lot of positives in this last season of 2024. But for me to sum it up, my top 3 things that went wrong for the Toronto Blue Jays, my number 1 is just the lack of free agents that you signed. You just didn't do enough in the offseason. That was very apparent right from the get-go. The second one for me, it's got to be George Springer, and I guess I'll throw Bichette in here. Just your top 2 guys just falling off the face of the earth when you have, again, the same thing with the bullpen, which is my third one. When you don't have your top guys playing like your top guys, you don't have guys to lean on. The other parts of the offense are unfortunately not going to be able to pick the other guys up, especially when you got guys that are very inconsistent and very inexperienced in the MLB. And then the bullpen, you need a good bullpen, obviously. You can't rely on Kevin Gausman, Berrios, Spelman Francis throwing 8 innings and no earned runs. Even if they did that, they might score in the 9th inning anyway. So unfortunately, you need a good bullpen to be a successful baseball team.
Yeah, Carter, I think that's everybody's top 3. I mean, it's not a surprise. It's not a shock. Those are the big 3 components that killed this season for the Toronto Blue Jays. We go back and look at the free agency. I mean, it was just poor. It was just very poor. Then George, your superstars not playing like superstars. We always talk about you need multiple guys to be at their best for you to win in any season. Doesn't matter what league you play in, you can't be carried by one player. And maybe in the off 1% chance that it happens, great. But I mean, overall, you need guys. You need your superstars to be superstars, Carter. It's a very frustrating 2024 for all Blue Jays fans and everybody watching and listening and tuning into our podcast. I'm sure you all feel the same way. It was frustrating. And we, now all we can do really is look forward to 2025, figure out, okay, what does this team need to do? And I mean, we could figure out even if we want to, we could have the big solution. It doesn't mean it's going to play out. Carter, in saying that, this is sort of a long-winded episode of saying, thank God this season is over. And we're going to have so much more content. Like we said, the next couple weeks are going to be just insane with the amount of Blue Jays stuff coming out from us. So hopefully you guys are tuned right into that. As we always say, we appreciate you guys making us your first listen. Make sure you go check out Locked On MLB. Paul Sullivan, Sully will be covering the playoffs and everything for you guys over there. So make sure you go make him your second listen at Locked On MLB. Yeah, Carter, I don't know, my guy. It just sucks that we're here.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. The only thing I got left to say is just farewell to Guillermo Martinez. I guess thanks for 2021. I'll give you 5% of the credit for that season. That's all I got. Thank you guys for watching. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.